My brother stole my inheritance, destroyed my marriage, and left me homeless. Or so I thought until I discovered what he'd actually been hiding from our family for 23 years. I'm telling you this story because sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But sometimes what looks like betrayal is actually the greatest gift you'll ever receive. My name is Sarah, and 3 months ago I believed my older brother Marcus was the most selfish, manipulative person I'd ever known. Today I'm not even sure I know who I am anymore. It all started when our father passed away last December. Dad was 72, a retired construction foreman who'd built our family's modest 2-story house with his own hands back in 1987. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and bacon on Sunday mornings. Marcus and I had grown up in that house. We'd carved our initials in the oak tree out back, broken the same living room window twice playing baseball, and spent countless summer evenings on the front porch listening to Dad tell stories about his construction days. When Dad got sick, pancreatic issues, the doctors said, we both knew the house would probably need to be sold to cover medical expenses. Dad had some savings, but not enough for the kind of care he needed. Marcus stepped up immediately. He'd always been the responsible one, the firstborn who got his business degree, married young, had 2 kids by 30. I was the artist, the dreamer who'd moved to Portland to pursue photography and barely scraped by month to month. Don't worry about it, Sarah, Marcus told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I've got Dad covered. Focus on your work. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt useless. Guilty. Like I was letting my family down while my brother carried all the weight. Dad passed quietly on a Tuesday morning in December. Marcus handled the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, everything. I flew back to Michigan feeling like a stranger in my own hometown, staying in a hotel because the house felt too empty without Dad's presence. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. I sat in the lawyer's office, still numb from grief, expecting to hear that everything would be split between Marcus and me equally. Maybe the house would go to Marcus since he had the family, the stability. I could live with that. But that's not what happened. To my son Marcus, the lawyer read, I leave my tools, my truck, and my gratitude for taking care of me in my final years. I waited for my name. Waited for the house, the savings account, something. To my daughter Sarah, I leave my love and my hope that she will find her own way in this world. That was it. That was everything. I stared at the lawyer, certain there'd been some mistake. I'm sorry, what about the house? What about Dad's savings? The lawyer looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Marcus, then back at me. I'm afraid that's all that's specified in the will, Miss Chen. Chen. My married name. Dad had updated the will after my wedding 5 years ago, but apparently not after my divorce last year. Just another reminder of how disconnected I'd become from my own family. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Where's the rest of it? Marcus shifted in his chair beside me. Sarah, maybe we should talk about this later. No. I turned to face him, something cold settling in my stomach. I want to understand this now. Dad had savings. He had the house. Where did it all go? The lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps this is a family matter best discussed privately. That's when it hit me. The truth I should have seen coming. You took it all, didn't you? I said to Marcus. While I was in Portland, while Dad was sick, you convinced him to sign everything over to you. Marcus's face went red. Sarah, it's not what you think. Isn't it? I was standing now, my voice getting louder. Dad was vulnerable, scared, and you took advantage of that. You made him believe I didn't care enough to help. That's not true. Then explain it to me, Marcus. Explain how our father's entire life savings and the house he built with his own hands somehow disappeared from his will. Marcus looked at the floor. Dad. Dad made his choice. Choice? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What choice? You were here. You were the one talking to him every day, taking him to appointments, probably managing his finances. It would have been so easy to convince a sick, elderly man that his daughter who lived across the country didn't deserve anything. Sarah, please. No, I get it now. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? Keep me at a distance, make me feel guilty for not being here, then swoop in and take everything when Dad was too sick to think clearly. I stormed out of that office feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Not just because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't need it. My photography business was barely surviving, my ex-husband had left me with a mountain of debt, and I'd been counting on Dad's inheritance to help me get back on my feet. But more than that, I felt betrayed by the two people I'd loved most in the world. My father, who'd apparently decided I wasn't worth remembering in his final wishes. And my brother, who'd manipulated a dying man for his own gain. I drove straight to the house. Dad's house, to pick up the few personal items the lawyer said I was entitled to. Family photos, some of Mom's jewelry, things like that. Marcus's truck was already in the driveway. I found him in Dad's bedroom, going through the closet. Getting an early start on cleaning out the evidence? I asked from the doorway. He didn't look at me. Sarah, there are things you don't understand. Then help me understand, Marcus. Help me understand how you can live with yourself. He finally turned around, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. Marcus never cried. Not when Mom died 8 years ago, not at Dad's funeral, not ever. You want to know the truth, he said, his voice shaking. Fine. Here's the truth. Dad didn't trust you. The words hit me like a slap. He didn't trust you not to waste whatever he left you. He didn't trust you to be responsible with it. He watched you make one bad decision after another, the marriage to that loser who cleaned out your bank account, the failed business ventures, the way you could never stick to anything long enough to make it work. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he kept going. And he was right, wasn't he? You're 34 years old, Sarah. When was the last time you had more than $500 in your checking account? When was the last time you didn't need someone else to bail you out of your latest crisis? Each word was like a knife. Partly because they hurt, but mostly because some of them were true. So you convinced him I was worthless, I said quietly. I didn't have to convince him of anything. He could see it for himself. Every phone call where you needed money for rent, for car repairs, for whatever drama was happening in your life that month. He was tired of it, Sarah. He was tired of watching you throw away every opportunity you'd ever been given. That's not fair. Isn't it? Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Do you know what Dad told me 3 weeks before he died? He said he wished he'd been tougher on you when you were younger. He said maybe if he'd made you face some real consequences instead of always rescuing you, you might have turned out different. I felt like I was drowning. So he decided to teach me a lesson by leaving me nothing? He decided to leave everything to the child who'd proven he could be trusted with it. That night, I sat in my hotel room and called my ex-husband David. I know, terrible idea. But I was desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, that what Marcus had done was wrong. Sarah, David said when he heard my voice, please tell me you're not calling about money again. David, I need to tell someone what happened. Look, I know your dad died, and I'm sorry about that. But we're divorced. We're done. I can't keep being your emotional support system every time your life falls apart. This is different. It's always different with you, Sarah. But it's always the same result. You make bad choices, then you expect everyone else to fix the consequences. He hung up on me. I stared at the phone in my hand, realizing that maybe Marcus was right. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was just a 34-year-old woman who'd never learned how to take care of herself. The next morning, I drove back to Portland with nothing but a box of old photos and Mom's wedding ring. I had about $800 to my name, 3 months left on my apartment lease, and no idea what I was going to do next. Over the following weeks, things got worse. Much worse. My biggest photography client canceled their contract. Apparently, they'd heard through mutual connections about my family drama and decided they didn't want to work with someone who was unstable. Then my landlord informed me that the building was being sold and I had 30 days to find a new place. Then my car broke down. Transmission problems that would cost more to fix than the car was worth. I couldn't afford a new place to live. I couldn't afford a new car. I couldn't even afford to keep my photography equipment in storage. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly, completely stuck. I swallowed my pride and called Marcus. "I need help," I said when he answered. Silence on the other end. "Marcus, I'm about to be homeless. I know things are complicated between us right now, but I'm your sister. I need help." "Sarah." His voice was different. Tired. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean I can't help you. Not this time." "Are you serious? You inherited everything Dad worked for his entire life, and you can't spare enough to help your sister get back on her feet?" "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple, Marcus. You have money. I need money. We're family." "Family." He laughed, but it sounded bitter. "When was the last time you called me before you needed something, Sarah? When was the last time you asked about my kids, my wife, my life? When was the last time you acted like family instead of just showing up with your hand out?" I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Because he was right. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "You're right. I've been selfish. But I'm asking now, not just for money, but for a chance to make things right between us." "I can't," he repeated. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The line went dead. That night, I sold my camera equipment. My professional-grade Canon, the lenses I'd saved for 2 years to afford, the lighting kit I'd bought when I thought my business was finally taking off. All of it. Gone. It bought me another month of rent and a beat-up Honda Civic that made concerning noises every time I turned left. I started taking whatever work I could find. Waitressing, dog walking, house cleaning. Anything to keep myself afloat while I figured out what to do next. But Portland is expensive, and minimum wage work doesn't go far. I was falling behind on everything. 3 weeks later, I got evicted. I spent my first night sleeping in my car behind a 24-hour diner, wondering how my life had gotten so completely derailed. 6 months ago, I'd been struggling but hopeful. I'd had my own apartment, my photography business, plans for the future. Now I was homeless, broke, and completely alone. I thought about calling Marcus again, but I couldn't face another rejection. Instead, I called my old college roommate Jenny, who lived in Seattle. "Of course you can stay here," she said without hesitation. "How soon can you get here?" Jenny was exactly the kind of friend I hadn't been to anyone in years. She didn't ask questions, didn't judge, didn't make me feel like a burden. She just cleared out her guest room and helped me figure out how to put my life back together. "You know what you need," she said one evening as we sat on her couch sharing a bottle of wine. "You need to stop running away from your problems and start facing them head-on." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've been drifting for years, Sarah. Moving from one thing to the next without ever really committing to anything. Your photography business, your marriage, your relationship with your family, you've been treating everything like it's temporary. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you stuck with something long enough to see it through? When was the last time you made a plan and followed it all the way to the end?" I wanted to argue, but she was right. I'd been running from commitment my entire adult life, always looking for the easy way out when things got difficult. So what do I do? You figure out what you actually want, and then you work for it. Really work for it. Not just until it gets hard or uncomfortable, but until you achieve it. That conversation was a turning point for me. I started looking at my situation differently. Instead of seeing myself as a victim of circumstances, I started taking responsibility for the choices that had led me here. I got a full-time job at a marketing firm, doing social media management for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady income with health benefits. I moved into my own studio apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I started rebuilding my photography business on the side, taking on small projects and gradually building a new portfolio. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just treading water. But I still thought about Marcus every day. I was angry at him for abandoning me when I needed help most, but I also missed him. He was the only family I had left, and our relationship felt irreparably broken. That's when I decided to do something I probably should have done months earlier. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds. But I needed to understand what had really happened with Dad's estate. If Marcus had manipulated Dad into leaving everything to him, I wanted proof. If there was any chance of contesting the will, I needed to know. The investigator's name was Tom Rodriguez, a former police detective who specialized in financial investigations. He was thorough, professional, and expensive, but Jenny loaned me the money. "I'll look into your father's finances for the year before his death," Tom told me during our initial meeting. "Bank records, property transfers, any significant changes to his accounts or legal documents. If your brother was manipulating the situation, there should be evidence." 3 weeks later, Tom called me with his preliminary findings. "Can you come to my office?" he asked. "There are some things we need to discuss in person." I drove to his office expecting to hear confirmation of what I already suspected. Marcus had taken advantage of Dad's illness to steal my inheritance. Instead, Tom showed me something I never expected. "Your father's medical bills," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "From the last 18 months of his life." I looked at the numbers and felt my stomach drop. The total was staggering. More than $200,000. Insurance covered some of it, Tom continued, but not nearly enough. "Your father was facing bankruptcy." "That can't be right. Dad always said he had good insurance through his union." "He did, but pancreatic issues require specialized treatment. Experimental procedures, medications that aren't fully covered, extended hospital stays." The bills accumulated quickly. Tom pulled out another set of documents. "These are your father's bank statements for the same period." I watched as he traced the monthly payments. Large sums going out regularly to hospitals, specialists, treatment centers. "Where was this money coming from?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Tom said. He pulled out another document. "Your father took out a second mortgage on the house 6 months before he died." "A second mortgage? For how much?" $80,000. It kept him afloat for a while, but it wasn't enough. Tom showed me more documents. Dad's savings account, drained completely. His retirement fund, emptied to pay medical bills. "So there really wasn't anything left," I said quietly. "That's not the whole story," Tom said. "Look at this." He showed me a series of bank transfers. Large deposits into Dad's checking account, all from the same source. Marcus's business account. "Your brother was covering your father's medical expenses," Tom said. "For over a year, he was making monthly payments to keep your father's treatment going." I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. "How much?" "Total?" "Close to $300,000. $300,000. Marcus had spent $300,000 of his own money to keep Dad alive. "But the house," I said weakly. "Marcus inherited the house." "Your brother didn't inherit anything," Tom said gently. He bought the house from your father a year ago to help cover medical expenses. Paid full market value, $140,000. That's not, the will said. The will was written before your father got sick. When it became clear that the medical expenses were going to consume everything, your father sold the house to your brother to help pay for treatment. It was the only asset he had left. Tom pulled out one more document. This is the real will, Sarah. The one your father wrote 3 weeks before he died. I took the document with shaking hands and read it. To my son Marcus, I leave my eternal gratitude for sacrificing his children's college funds, his family's security, and his own future to keep me alive long enough to see one more Christmas. I can never repay what he has given me. To my daughter Sarah, I leave my love and my regret that I was not strong enough to burden her with the knowledge of how much her brother was suffering to help me. I pray that someday she will understand that Marcus's silence was not selfishness, but love. The document went on to explain that the inheritance Marcus had received, the tools, the truck, were actually the only things Dad had left that weren't already sold or mortgaged to pay medical bills. I looked up at Tom, tears streaming down my face. So Marcus, your brother bankrupted himself to keep your father alive, Tom said quietly. And then he let you hate him rather than tell you the truth. I drove back to Seattle in a daze, trying to process everything I'd learned. Marcus hadn't stolen my inheritance. There had been no inheritance to steal. Marcus hadn't manipulated Dad into leaving me out of the will. Dad had left me out because there was nothing left to leave. Marcus hadn't abandoned me when I needed help. He literally didn't have any money to help me with because he'd spent everything he had on Dad's medical care. I'd spent 4 months hating my brother for being selfish and greedy, when in reality he'd sacrificed everything for our family and then protected me from knowing the truth. I called him that night. Sarah? He sounded surprised to hear from me. Marcus, I need to see you. I need to apologize. Silence. I hired an investigator, I said. I know about the medical bills. I know about the money you spent. I know about everything. I heard him take a shaky breath. Sarah. Why didn't you tell me? What was I supposed to say? That Dad was dying because we couldn't afford to keep him alive? That I was draining my kids' college funds to pay for experimental treatments that probably wouldn't work anyway? That I was going to lose my house if the bills kept coming? You should have told me the truth. The truth? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that I let my father die in debt because I couldn't afford to save him. The truth is that I bankrupted my family for 6 extra months with a man who was suffering every single day. The truth is that I failed everyone who mattered to me. That's not true. Isn't it? Dad died anyway, Sarah. All that money, all that sacrifice, and he died anyway. And now my wife is working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, my kids are going to community college instead of the universities they deserved, and I still wake up every night wondering if I made the right choice. I was crying now, understanding for the first time the weight my brother had been carrying. You gave Dad 6 more months, I said. 6 months to see his grandchildren grow up. 6 months to watch Marcus Jr. graduate high school. 6 months to walk Katie down the aisle at her wedding. Those weren't wasted months, Marcus. They were precious. He was in pain, Sarah. Constant pain. Some days I wonder if I kept him alive for him or for me. You kept him alive because you loved him. Because that's what family does. Is it? Because when you needed help, I couldn't do the same for you. You couldn't help me because you'd already given everything you had to help Dad. I understand that now. We talked for 2 hours that night. Marcus told me about the sleepless nights, the constant stress, the way he'd hidden the truth from his own wife and children to protect them from worrying. He told me about the day he'd realized Dad was never going to recover, and how he'd had to choose between continuing expensive treatments or letting Dad die in peace. He told me about the guilt he'd been carrying, the feeling that he'd failed as a son and as a brother. And I told him about my own failures. About the years I'd spent avoiding responsibility, expecting other people to solve my problems. About how I'd blamed him for my own shortcomings instead of taking accountability for my choices. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when Dad was sick. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed support. I'm sorry I made everything about me instead of trying to understand what you were going through." "We both made mistakes," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, but yours were made out of love. Mine were made out of selfishness." 3 days later, I flew back to Michigan. Marcus picked me up at the airport, and for the first time in years, we hugged like we meant it. He took me to the house, his house now, and I met his wife Karen and his kids properly for the first time since they were small. Katie was 22 now, working as a nurse while taking evening classes to finish her degree. Marcus Jr. was 19, studying automotive technology at the local community college while working part-time to help with expenses. They were good kids. Responsible, hardworking, resilient. The kind of adults I wished I'd been at their age. "Dad told us about Grandpa's medical bills," Katie said as we sat around the kitchen table. "He didn't want us to know how bad it was, but we figured it out. We tried to help," Marcus Jr. added. "I was going to take a gap year, get a full-time job, but Dad wouldn't let me." "Your education was more important," Marcus said firmly. "So was yours," Karen said to her husband. "You've been working 70-hour weeks for 2 years trying to rebuild our savings. When's the last time you took a day off?" I looked around the table at this family that had sacrificed so much for Dad and for each other, and I felt ashamed of how I'd been living my own life. That weekend, Marcus showed me Dad's workshop in the garage. All the tools were still there, organized exactly the way Dad had kept them. "I can't bring myself to change anything," Marcus said. "Sometimes I come out here just to feel close to him." I picked up one of Dad's hammers, remembering how he'd taught us both to use tools when we were kids. "He'd be proud of you, you know." "Would he?" "I couldn't save him, Sarah. You gave him the most precious gift anyone can give. You gave him time. Time with his family, time to see his grandchildren become adults, time to know that his children were good people who loved each other." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I miss him every day." "So do I. But I'm grateful for what you did. Even if it cost you everything." "It didn't cost me everything," Marcus said. "It cost me money." "That's different." We spent the rest of the weekend going through old photo albums, sharing memories of Dad, talking about our childhood. It felt like the first real conversation we'd had in years. On Sunday, as I was getting ready to fly back to Seattle, Marcus pulled me aside. "I have something for you," he said. He handed me a small jewelry box. Inside was Mom's engagement ring, the one that had belonged to her mother before her. "Dad wanted you to have this," Marcus said. It was in his instructions to me, along with some other things. "Other things?" Marcus led me to the spare bedroom, where he'd set up a small easel and art supplies. "Dad knew you'd given up your photography equipment," he said. "He asked me to make sure you had what you needed to start over. There were professional-grade cameras, lenses, lighting equipment. Everything I'd had to sell, and more." "Marcus, I can't accept this. You've already given too much." "It's not from me," he said quietly. "Dad set aside money for this before he got sick. He made me promise to give it to you when you were ready to really commit to something." "When I was ready?" "He knew you, Sarah. He knew you had talent, but he also knew you had a habit of giving up when things got difficult. He wanted to make sure that when you got this equipment, you'd use it to build something lasting." I looked at the cameras, the lenses, the carefully chosen equipment. It represented thousands of dollars that could have gone toward Dad's medical care or Marcus's family expenses. "He believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself," I said. "He always believed in you." "We both did." even when you made it hard to. I returned to Seattle with more than just photography equipment. I returned with a new understanding of what family really means, and what it means to love someone enough to sacrifice for them. Over the next few months, I threw myself into rebuilding my photography business with the same dedication Marcus had shown in caring for Dad. I started specializing in family portraits, particularly multi-generational sessions. There was something about capturing the connections between grandparents, parents, and children that felt meaningful to me in a way my previous work never had. My business grew quickly. Word of mouth brought me more clients than I could handle, and I started booking sessions months in advance. But more importantly, I maintained my relationship with Marcus and his family. I called regularly, not just when I needed something, but to check in, to offer support, to be present in their lives. When Katie graduated nursing school, I flew out for the ceremony and paid for the family dinner afterward. When Marcus Jr. got his first job at a local auto shop, I sent him a set of professional tools with Dad's initials engraved on them. When Karen got promoted to department manager at her job, I sent flowers and a congratulations card. Small gestures, but they mattered. They were my way of showing up for the people who had always shown up for each other. 6 months after my revelation about Dad's medical expenses, I got a call from Tom Rodriguez, the private investigator. "Sarah, I've been doing some additional research on your father's case, and I found something interesting." "What kind of something?" "It seems your father had a life insurance policy through his union that no one knew about. An old policy from the 1980s that was never updated or claimed." My heart started racing. "How much?" $50,000. "It would go to his beneficiaries, that would be you and your brother." $50,000. "Split between Marcus and me, it would be $25,000 each." Not life-changing money, but enough to make a real difference. I called Marcus immediately. "I'm not taking it," he said when I told him about the insurance policy. "What do you mean you're not taking it?" "I mean it should go to you. You're the one who's been struggling financially." "Marcus, that's not how this works. We split it equally." "Sarah, I have a house, a job, a family that's getting back on their feet. You're still rebuilding your life. Take the money." "Absolutely not." We argued about it for 20 minutes before I finally hung up on him and called the insurance company directly. "I'd like to designate my portion of the payout as a contribution to a college fund," I told the representative. "Whose college fund?" "Marcus and Karen Chen's children. Katie and Marcus Jr." When Marcus found out what I'd done, he called me in tears. "Sarah, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Dad would have wanted his grandchildren to have every opportunity possible. This is my way of honoring his memory and saying thank you for everything you've done for our family." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use the money wisely. Say you'll make sure Katie and Marcus Jr. know their grandfather would have been proud of them. They already know that. But now they'll know their aunt is pretty amazing too." That conversation was 8 months ago. Since then, my life has transformed in ways I never expected. My photography business is thriving. I've moved into a larger studio space and hired an assistant. I'm booked solid through next year, and I've started teaching photography workshops on weekends. But more than professional success, I've found something I'd been missing for years: purpose. Every family portrait I take, every moment I capture between parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren, feels like a tribute to Dad and to the love he and Marcus shared. I've also become more involved in my community. I volunteer at a local nonprofit that provides support services for families dealing with serious illness. I help them navigate insurance issues, connect with resources, and sometimes just listen when they need someone to understand what they're going through. It's work that feels meaningful in a way my previous career never did. Marcus and I talk every week now. Real conversations about our lives, our fears, our hopes for the future. We've planned a family vacation for this summer, the first time in over a decade that we'll all be together just for fun, not because someone is sick or dying. Katie started her master's degree program in pediatric nursing. Marcus Jr. was accepted into a specialized automotive technology program that will allow him to transfer to a 4-year university. They're both thriving, pursuing their dreams because their father made incredible sacrifices to give them opportunities. Karen was promoted again and is now managing the entire customer service department at her company. She started taking evening classes too, working toward a business degree she's always wanted. And Marcus is finally starting to heal from the trauma of Dad's illness and death. He's seeing a counselor, taking better care of his health, learning to forgive himself for not being able to save Dad. You know what I've realized, he told me during our last phone call. I spent so much time feeling guilty about Dad's death that I forgot to feel grateful for his life. What do you mean? I mean we had him for 72 years. We had him for our entire childhoods, for our weddings, for the birth of his grandchildren. Most people don't get that much time with their parents. Instead of focusing on the months I couldn't save him, I should be grateful for the decades we had him. That's beautiful, Marcus. Dad used to say that life isn't about how much time you get, it's about what you do with the time you have. I think I'm finally starting to understand what he meant. As I wrap up this story, I keep thinking about the assumptions we make about other people's motives, especially when we're hurting. For months, I believed my brother was selfish, greedy, manipulative. I created an entire narrative about his character based on incomplete information and my own insecurities. The truth was so much more complex and beautiful than what I'd imagined. Marcus had sacrificed everything for our family, and then protected me from the weight of that sacrifice by letting me believe he was the villain in our story. That level of love, that level of selflessness, is something I'm still learning to understand and emulate. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not drifting through life anymore, waiting for someone else to solve my problems or rescue me from my own poor choices. I'm building something lasting, something meaningful. I'm showing up for the people I love, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. I'm learning what it means to be part of a family that supports each other through crisis, celebrates each other's successes, and loves unconditionally even when that love requires sacrifice. Most importantly, I'm learning to see beyond my own perspective, to consider that there might be more to any situation than what I initially understand. The story I thought I was living, the story of betrayal and abandonment, was actually a story of love and sacrifice that I was too self-centered to recognize. Sometimes the people we think are hurting us are actually the ones protecting us from pain we're not ready to handle. Sometimes what looks like betrayal is actually the greatest act of love we'll ever receive. And sometimes the inheritance that matters most isn't money or property or things that can be counted and divided. Sometimes the real inheritance is the example of how to love someone so completely that you're willing to sacrifice everything for their well-being, and then sacrifice your reputation to protect them from feeling guilty about your sacrifice. That's the inheritance my brother gave me. That's the lesson my father's life and death taught me. And that's the legacy I'm trying to build in my own life now, not through what I accumulate, but through what I'm willing to give. The house Dad built with his own hands is still standing. Marcus and his family live there now, and they've taken beautiful care of it. The oak tree where we carved our initials is bigger now, stronger, its roots deeper than they were when we were children. Last month, I visited for Katie's birthday. As we sat on that same front porch where Dad used to tell his construction stories, Marcus brought out a photo album I'd never seen before. Dad kept this during his treatment, Marcus said, opening to the first page. Pictures of every family gathering, every holiday, every important moment from his last year. The photos were beautiful. Christmas morning with his grandchildren. Katie's nursing school graduation. Marcus Jr.'s prom. Family dinners around the kitchen table. Moments of joy and connection captured in the midst of illness and uncertainty. He told me once that the photos were his reminder of why the fight was worth it, Marcus said. Every day of treatment, every painful procedure, every sleepless night, he said it was all worthwhile if it meant he could be present for one more of these moments. I studied the pictures, seeing my father's face in each one. Tired, yes. Older, definitely. But smiling. Present. Engaged with the family he loved so much. I wish I'd been in more of these pictures, I said quietly. You were there in spirit, Katie said, sitting down beside me. Grandpa talked about you all the time. He'd show us your photography work, tell us stories about when you and Dad were kids. He was so proud of you, even when he was worried about you. He never stopped believing you'd find your way, Marcus added. Even when you couldn't see it yourself. That evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Marcus walked me out to my rental car. Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you, he said. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. My stomach tightened. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't sure I could handle another revelation. Dad left something else for you. Not in the will, but, well, you'll see. He handed me a thick envelope with my name written on it in Dad's handwriting. He gave this to me a week before he died, Marcus said. Made me promise to give it to you when I thought you were ready to hear what he had to say. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in Dad's careful script. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Marcus has decided you're finally ready to understand some things I was never brave enough to tell you while I was alive. The letter went on to explain everything, the medical bills, Marcus's sacrifices, the difficult decisions they'd made together about treatment options and financial priorities. But more than that, it was an apology. I know you felt abandoned when you needed help most, Dad wrote. I know you thought Marcus and I had conspired against you, that we'd decided you weren't worthy of love or support. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reason we didn't tell you about my illness, about the financial strain, about how much Marcus was sacrificing, is because we loved you too much to burden you with our problems. You were building a new life for yourself, recovering from your divorce, trying to establish your career. We didn't want to derail your progress with our crisis. But I realize now that by protecting you from our struggles, we may have made you feel excluded from our family. That was never our intention. You were always in our hearts, always in our thoughts, always part of every decision we made. The letter continued for several more pages, sharing memories of my childhood, expressing pride in my artistic talents, acknowledging the challenges I'd faced as an adult, and offering forgiveness for the times I'd let my family down. But the part that broke me completely was the ending. Sarah, I need you to know that your brother is the finest man I've ever known. What he did for me, the sacrifices he made, the way he carried the weight of our family's crisis without complaint. I could never have asked for that level of devotion, but he gave it freely. He bankrupted himself to give me 6 more months of life. 6 months to see my granddaughter graduate nursing school. 6 months to watch my grandson grow into a young man I'm proud of. 6 months to know that my children love each other enough to make difficult sacrifices for family. But more than that, he protected you from having to make impossible choices about my care. He took on the financial burden, the emotional stress, the daily management of my illness, all so you could continue building your life without the weight of guilt or obligation. That's what love looks like, Sarah. Not grand gestures or perfect words, but quiet sacrifice and selfless protection. Marcus loved you enough to let you hate him rather than burden you with the truth of what my illness was costing our family. I'm telling you this now because I need you to understand that whatever happens between you and Marcus after I'm gone, it comes from a place of love. If he seems distant or unavailable, it's because he's trying to spare you from consequences of choices he made. If he can't help you when you need it, it's because he's already given everything he had to give. Please don't let my death destroy the relationship between you and your brother. You're all the family each other has left, and family is the most precious thing in this world. I love you, Sarah. I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. I believe in your strength, your resilience, your capacity for growth and change. Most of all, I believe in your ability to love and be loved, even when that love requires forgiveness. The letter was signed simply, Dad. I stood in Marcus's driveway, crying as I read those words, understanding finally the depth of love that had motivated every decision my father and brother had made. They hadn't excluded me from their crisis to punish me or because they didn't trust me. They'd excluded me to protect me, to preserve my chance at building a stable, independent life. Marcus had sacrificed his family's financial security not just for Dad, but for me too, to spare me from having to choose between my own survival and my father's medical care. That's a choice no child should have to make, and my brother had made sure I never had to face it. When I looked up, Marcus was standing nearby, giving me space to process but staying close enough to offer support if I needed it. How long have you been carrying this guilt? I asked him. What guilt? The guilt of thinking you failed, Dad. The guilt of thinking you weren't enough. The guilt of letting me struggle without help. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Every day since he died. Marcus, look at me. He met my eyes, and I saw years of pain and self-doubt reflected there. You didn't fail, Dad. You gave him the most beautiful gift imaginable. You gave him time, dignity, family, love. You gave him the chance to die surrounded by people who adored him, in a home filled with memories, knowing his children and grandchildren were going to be okay. But the cost. The cost was money, Marcus. Just money. What you gave him was priceless. What about you? What about the help you needed when I couldn't provide it? What about it? I survived. I figured it out. I became stronger and more self-reliant because I had to. That wasn't a failure on your part, that was a gift. You helped me become the person I needed to be. Marcus started crying then, really crying, for the first time since Dad's funeral. I was so scared I'd made the wrong choices, he said. So scared that I'd failed everyone who mattered to me. You made the choices that love required, I told him. And because of those choices, Dad got to see his granddaughter become a nurse. He got to see his grandson grow into a responsible young man. He got to know that his son was the kind of man who would sacrifice everything for family. And eventually, he got to see his daughter learn what it means to be truly independent and self-sufficient. Those weren't failures, Marcus. Those were victories. Those were the things Dad was fighting to stay alive long enough to see. We stood there in the driveway, two siblings who had found their way back to each other through pain and misunderstanding and ultimately, love. There's one more thing, Marcus said as we hugged goodbye. Dad's workshop. I've been thinking about converting it into a photography studio. For when you visit. If you want. Marcus, I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Dad would love knowing his tools were sharing space with your cameras. He'd love knowing the place where he created things was being used by his daughter to create art. 6 months later, I moved back to Michigan. Not permanently, but for extended visits several times a year. I kept my Seattle studio, but I also established a second location in Marcus's converted workshop. There's something magical about taking family portraits in the same space where Dad spent so many hours building and fixing and creating. The light is perfect, streaming through the windows he installed himself. The atmosphere is warm and welcoming, filled with the energy of someone who loved working with his hands. I've photographed 3 generations of families in that space now. Grandparents, parents, children, all gathered together to celebrate connections that transcend time and circumstance. Each session reminds me of what I learned from Dad's death and Marcus's sacrifice, that family isn't about perfection or constant presence or never making mistakes. Family is about showing up when it matters most, even when the cost is high. It's about loving people enough to make difficult choices for their benefit. It's about forgiveness, understanding, and the willingness to see beyond surface appearances to the heart of someone's motivations. It's about recognizing that sometimes the people who seem to be hurting us are actually the ones loving us most deeply. I still think about that day in the lawyer's office when I learned I'd been left out of Dad's will. I remember the rage, the sense of betrayal, the conviction that I'd been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me most. If someone had told me then that within a year I'd discover the real story, that my father's apparent rejection was actually protection, that my brother's seeming selfishness was actually the deepest kind of love, I never would have believed them. But that's the thing about family, about love, about life itself. The most important truths are rarely obvious on the surface. The inheritance I thought I'd lost was nothing compared to the inheritance I actually received, the example of unconditional love, selfless sacrifice, and the kind of strength that allows someone to be misunderstood rather than burden others with painful truths. That's the inheritance I'm trying to pass on now, through my work, my relationships, my commitment to showing up for the people I love even when it's difficult or costly. Every family portrait I take, every moment I capture between people who love each other, is a celebration of the connections that make life meaningful. Every time I choose to make a sacrifice for someone else's benefit, every time I protect someone from unnecessary pain, every time I love someone enough to be misunderstood rather than burden them with my struggles, I'm honoring the legacy Dad and Marcus gave me. The story I thought I was living, the story of abandonment and betrayal, turned out to be a love story all along. A love story about a father who fought for 6 extra months of life because every day with his family was worth any amount of pain. A love story about a brother who gave up his financial security to honor his father's desire to spend those months surrounded by the people he cherished most. A love story about protection and sacrifice and the kind of strength that allows someone to be the villain in someone else's story rather than reveal truths that would cause them pain. Most importantly, it's a love story about forgiveness, understanding, and second chances. About the possibility of rebuilding relationships that seem irreparably broken. About finding family not just in the people who share your blood, but in the people who choose to show up for you consistently, who love you through your mistakes, who believe in your capacity for growth even when you don't believe in it yourself. If you've made it this far in my story, I want you to know that I see you. Whether you're struggling with family relationships, dealing with financial stress, recovering from betrayal, or just trying to figure out how to be a better person, I see you. The path forward isn't always clear. Sometimes the people we think are hurting us are actually trying to help us. Sometimes the help we think we need isn't the help that will actually serve us best. Sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is let us figure things out for ourselves, even when that means watching us struggle. But I also want you to know that it's never too late to seek understanding, to ask questions, to look beyond surface appearances to the deeper truths that motivate people's actions. It's never too late to apologize for assumptions you made or harm you caused. It's never too late to rebuild relationships that matter to you. It's never too late to become the kind of person who shows up for others the way Marcus showed up for Dad, the way Dad showed up for all of us even in his final months. The inheritance that matters most isn't money or property or things that can be counted and divided. The inheritance that matters most is love, demonstrated through sacrifice, expressed through action, proven through consistency over time. That's the inheritance I received from my father and my brother. That's the inheritance I'm trying to pass on through my life and work. And that's the inheritance that's available to all of us, if we're willing to love deeply enough to make it real. I hope my story has given you something to think about. I hope it's inspired you to look at your own relationships with fresh eyes, to consider that there might be more to any situation than what you initially see. Most of all, I hope it's reminded you that the people who love us most are often the ones willing to make the greatest sacrifices for our well-being, even when we can't see or understand those sacrifices at the time. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own family relationships or inspired you to reach out to someone you've been estranged from, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your own stories of family complexity, of misunderstandings that turned out to have deeper explanations, of relationships that were healed through forgiveness and understanding. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. I'll be back next week with another true story about the complicated, beautiful, sometimes painful reality of human relationships. Until then, remember, the people who love you most aren't always the ones who make your life easiest, but they're always the ones who help you become who you're meant to be.